Ready? Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. It is 10:02. So we'll open with public comment on closed session. Okay, seeing no public comment on closed session, we are going to recess into closed session at this time. Okay, everybody good?
That's like the third item on water resource manager report.
Okay, we are going to move into open session. First, we'll have a report out on closed session with Keith Lemieux. Is your microphone on?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. The board met in closed session to discuss 4 items as identified on the agenda. In each case, the first item was purchase of real property. The board received a report from agency negotiators on that item. No reportable action took place. The board also received reports on the remaining items, which were potential litigation, and received a report from special counsel and also agency counsel on those items. Again, there's nothing reportable as a result of those closed session matters. Mr. Chair, that concludes the report.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Okay, next we'll move with the Pledge of Allegiance. So everybody, please stand, face the flag, and follow me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Have a moment of silence, and then. Okay, next we will have roll call.
Vice Chair Rotora.
Here.
Chairman Heyman.
Present.
Director Itmeyer.
Here.
Director Peters.
Here.
Director Vallejo.
Present.
Okay, next we'll move on to item 5, public comments. This time is reserved for the public to address the board about matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Do we have any public comment? Go ahead, caller.
Hello, this is Renee Westola calling in. I just have a couple questions. Will we be hearing today if the Indian Wells Valley Water District has been paid back for their in full for their $500,000 advance to the GA? At the last meeting, it was reported that the water district didn't pay the basin replenishment fee because they were exchanging that for repayment, direct repayment of the $500,000 the water district originally advanced the GA. That was back a couple of years ago. One of my questions. And then I have a question about the billing address for the GA. Is it officially the 100 West California Avenue address? It's just a housekeeping issue I'm concerned about. I just wanted to know that. Those are my questions.
Thank you,
Would
Renee.
you like me to answer that? Would you like me to answer, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Okay, and So with regard to the water district payment, yes, I'll be reporting on that later in the meeting. And with regard to the billing address, yes, we are using the city's address for our mailing address. That would be the 100 California address.
Okay, so I think that answers those two questions. Do we have any other public comment? Caller, go ahead.
Yes, this is Don Decker. I'm going to recommend to you for the, I don't know how many times I've said it and others too, you need to open your meetings to the public, physical presence. There's no substitute for that. These calls coming in from a distance and all are not a substitute. The other thing which I would like to strongly recommend is that you revitalize the TAC and the PAC with real meetings of those committees. There is no substitute for local understanding and contribution, and you have expert capability on those committees that you're substantially missing. It's like flying blind, and some of your instruments are not working. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any? Caller, go ahead.
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, am I the next caller?
Yes, go ahead.
I can hardly hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is Judy Decker. I have two questions. My first question is, have the cast wells been measured? They used to be measured by the Kern Water Agency twice a year. They were publicly reported. I have seen no public reports of the cast gem wells. They need to be where the public is available for those ongoing numbers of water decline. The other question I have is, where is the written report on the El Paso well that was recently drilled to 50? It was to go to 1,500 feet, and it ended up only being 1,000 feet. That also needs to be available to the public. Thank you.
Does anyone want to address those questions?
Chairman Hyman, this is Steve. We will follow up. I want to make sure I have the right answers for her, but I've got it noted. We will follow up with Judy.
Okay, very good. Okay, next caller. Okay, seeing no further public comment, we will move on to approval of the consent agenda. We have items A, approved minutes of the board meeting March 10th, 2021. B, approved minutes of a special board meeting March 31st, 2021. And C, approved expenditures, CI $142,134.41 to Stetson Engineers. February, March, Prop 1 grant. Item C2, $2,320 to Regional Government Services, extraction fee and replenishment fees. Item C3, $23,831.25 to Capital Corps Group, February and March, replenishment fee. Item C4, $5,250 to Waterwise Consulting, Prop 1 grant, SDAC. And item C5, $24,443.66 to California Rural Water Association, Prop 1, SDAC. And then we, at this time, would like to add item 6, which I'll pass over to the general manager to give an overview of that. So if you would please, Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are asking to add an item to the expenditures to be approved. This is the invoice for the authority's liability insurance. It is through Cal Mutual's Joint Powers Authority. The invoice is in the amount of $11,441, and it is payable to Insurica, INSURICA, and this arose after the posting of the agenda, and the invoice will be paid and received by the end of April, so we wouldn't have time to pay it on the next regular meeting. So we're asking to add this invoice to the expenditures list.
And forgive me, Carol, for jumping in, but Steve, I think your call is unmuted, and it needs to be providing some feedback into the system. Thanks. So that worked. So this requires a separate motion by the board in order to add this item. You need to make a finding that the need arose subsequent to posting the agenda, and that you need to take action before the next meeting. You've just heard your general manager give you that information. So we would need, before you would approve the rest of these items, we would need a separate motion to add this item.
I'll move to add that item to this agenda following staff's recommendation.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Vice Chair.
Excuse me, I would like to have item B pulled. I was not at the meeting, and I don't want to vote on the minutes.
Let's follow through with this
This is a
action
direct-
first.
This is just an add-in?
Right. So hold tight
I'm
on
sorry.
your thoughts. So go ahead.
Hey, Stan, we can't hear you. You'll need to speak into the mic a little more clearly. But if you were talking about the motion currently before you is only to add that one item.
Yeah,
It's not on
right.
the-
Got it. Thank you.
Vice Chair Rotorua.
Aye.
Chairman Heyman.
Aye.
Director Itmeyer.
Aye.
Director Peters.
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Okay, so the item has been added. So at this time, I'd like to ask, is there any member of the public wish to pull any of the items on the agenda?
Go ahead, caller.
Hello?
Go ahead, caller.
Hello, this is Renee Westelusk.
Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, the address on the first invoice from Stetson Engineering has the county address, and it's being billed to the county. So has that been corrected?
Renee,
Like
this
it's
is April.
C1 on the expenditures.
Right. Renee, this is April. They do send those to me via email. So changing the address on the top of the invoice is a formality, and I'll contact the office manager at Stetson and have them change that. But I do receive them electronically.
So I can't hear you very well. So it's been taken care of.
Yes, I will speak to their office manager.
Okay. Thank you.
Any member of the board wish to pull any items on the agenda?
I would like to have item B pulled.
Could you say that again, please? Stan, which item?
B, 6B, the minutes to the March 31st, 2021 meeting. The Water District did not participate in that meeting.
Stan, I believe you can vote on the motion to approve, and just we can note an abstention on item B. unless you want to have it pulled.
Yeah, and let me just say, number one, Stan, I'm still having a little trouble hearing you, but when you're voting to approve the minutes, you're just voting to accept that document as the official record for the meeting. You don't have to have been present at the meeting in order to do that.
Okay.
Okay, so
I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda.
Second.
Vice Chair Rotora,
Aye.
Chairman Heyman,
Aye.
Director Itmeyer,
Aye.
Director Peters,
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Okay, moving to item number 7, Water Resources Managers Report. This will be presented by Steve Johnson.
I'm back on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the board, we've talked about it already, but to all of the stakeholders on the line, hello, everybody. We would like to have meetings in person, too, so we do support Don Decker's suggestion during public comments as soon as we possibly can. And just for Don's purposes, I'll let you know that the authority talks about this all the time. This is that concept's not being ignored. And I would love to come up there, too. We're going to work on that. Anyway, Water Resources Manager Report. It's kind of long. We have a lot of things that are going on. Even though some of the reports, there's not a lot of detail because we haven't done all that much as the last report, but we just feel it's important that we give you folks an update on everything that we're working on because there's a lot going on, and you should know every month where we're at. So as of right now, we're giving an update on all the work that we're doing. Also, I have a few people that will be joining in and reporting on their work because they're sort of managing that work, and I'll let you know when they come along. Starting from the first PowerPoint, updates on our grant information on the status of the grants and the work being done on the grants, and certainly payment. The first one is Prop 1 grant. We're all familiar with the big grant we got initially out of the Proposition 1. We're working on invoice 8A right now with DWR that covers the period of work that was done through July through September of 2020. We've got everything into them, everything they've asked for. At the last minute, as you'll note in the PowerPoint, DWR requested information, documentation on environmental and site clearance documents, access documents, site clearance is site access, on the work that was done during that period. Just for general information, folks, there is information in the grant document that we have indicating that they may ask for this kind of information, that it may be required. I think DWR is still getting their feet under them on the implementation of the grants and how they work, because we did not yet notice that this was needed in order to submit this invoice until after it had been through 2 rounds of review, and then they finally came back and said, oh, yeah, we can't pay until we get this documentation. So, as you know, at the bottom of these documents are being compiled right now for submission to DWR. There's no problem with them. We just have to pull them together because we have to do those documents and we have to fill out the site access, but we're pulling all the documentation together for a separate submittal. So it's for the total payment after retention, which I think is agreed to by DWR, is almost $138,000. There should be no issue getting payment. It's just a matter of being delayed until they get this documentation. So we're in good shape there. The next invoice, which is invoice 9A under Prop 1, covers a period from October through the end of the year, December. Total payment's almost $128,000. That was submitted in February, late February. Progress reports were also submitted. We have not heard any response from DWR indicating there are any questions with the invoice, but as you would expect, actual processing and payment of that invoice will follow invoice 8A, which I just mentioned. They're waiting for some additional documentation. So hopefully when we get the documentation on invoice 8A on Prop 1, the next invoice, which is 9A, will follow soon after that, since we haven't heard any concerns about the invoice. So that's Prop 1. The next PowerPoint is for Proposition 68. This is the original Prop 68. As you recall, this was for around $300,000. We have actually received most of the money from this. We're now cleaning. We're finishing up with some trailing money. We also have the 10% retention, which ultimately we will request. But just for an update, we did submit invoice 8B, which covered the period July through September, just like 8A on Prop 1. Total payment was a little over $3,000. Then we received payment in March, early March. Invoice 9B, which covers October through December, consistent with Prop 1. Total payment of a little over $4,000 was submitted in February 26th, along with the other invoices. DWR approved that invoice on March 26th, and we are currently awaiting payment on that invoice. The next PowerPoint we have relates to the new Proposition 68, which we reported earlier that there was a very large application of up to $5 million, included certain projects, and the authority was not selected in the award process by DWR, and some follow-up occurred. We promised that we would come back and give you an update on that. I think Joseph Montoya, who's been working hard on that application for grant funds, and discuss this with DWR in a conference call. I think, Joseph, if you're on, could you present on these next two PowerPoints? Joseph, are you on? Well, we'll see if he jumps on. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. As you follow the PowerPoint, there were 3 projects submitted, a water supply alternatives analysis and water use, recycled water for imported water, and then recycled water alternatives analysis.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, now you're on. Go ahead, Joseph.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, everybody. I forgot to unmute myself.
I thought that might be the case.
Yep.
I'm going to mute while you do this, so read that.
All righty. Good morning, everyone. I'm sure you're aware we submitted a Prop 8 grant back in January, grant application for 3 projects, 2 of which were alternatives analysis, imported and recycled water, and the 3rd project being Phase 1 of a recycled water project treatment design. So Steve mentioned this was a highly competitive grant. DWR received 15 eligible applications, requesting for $70 million in grant funding. Only $26 million was available to issue. So a draft funding list was released back in mid-March, public review, and as Steve said, we unfortunately weren't on the funding list. We reached out to DWR staff, Kelly List, over at the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program, to have a meeting with her and her staff to discuss their review and scoring of the authority's application. We had that meeting on March 25th, and if we go to the next slide, I've got a summary of what was discussed at this meeting and next steps for the Groundwater Authority. So Kelly pointed us to a section of the PSP, the proposal solicitation package, which indicated that planning, design, and environmental documentation were eligible project activities, but only as a task of a project or component of an overall project. And we were aware of these provisions in the PSP, and because of that, we decided that Project 3 would be separated into 2 different phases, because we ultimately, with input from the city of Ridgecrest and their project manager, their consultant, we came to the conclusion that construction probably wouldn't be able to occur during the window of this grant opportunity. So we decided to split this project into 2 phases. But Kelly and her staff indicated that didn't have any scoring results to review with us because our application did not meet their eligibility and completeness review. And the main reason for that is because we did not include any capital improvement or construction projects as a part of our project. And that's one of the things that DWR was looking for when they said that planning, design, and environmental could be only a smaller task of a larger component. They really wanted more focus on capital improvement, and which at this point the authority isn't in a state to include those in a grant application. But some good news, DWR did say that our application was overall very well organized, complete, and that if this CSP were purely for a planning solicitation, that it would probably score very highly. And some other good news is DWR has indicated that because a lot of their projects or their grant funding opportunities from 2020 were pushed back or delayed due to COVID and a number of other staffing issues, they have some money in their general fund for critically overdrafted basins, and they're anticipating that a new grant opportunity will be available in around July of this year. And because this is from their general fund, there's a little more flexibility as to what kinds of projects will be funded. And this is all very preliminary. It hasn't been publicly made available yet, but Kelly and our staff have indicated that this upcoming grant opportunity might be able to fund planning and or construction projects. So they told us that we should hold on to the Prop 8 grant that we submitted in January because a lot of that material could possibly be eligible in this upcoming grant. That's all I have. Do you want me to keep going or anything else to add?
Well, I think that's great, Joseph. Thank you. We'll keep everybody updated as we get more information on this new grant opportunity. And yes, Joseph, the next PowerPoint, the next update we have is on the recycled water program. And just for everybody's information, Jeff Helsley here, who you all know, and Joseph are the two leaders running that program. I'm certainly involved in keeping involved in the recycled water program, but Jeff and Joseph, and Jeff is on another call right now that he's having to do Zoom, so Joseph can report on the recycled water program update.
Okay, so like Steve said, this is for the recycled water alternatives analysis that we're preparing. This analysis was authorized at the January board meeting, and the purpose of it is to identify and evaluate potential uses of recycled water and identify those that achieve the highest and most cost-effective benefits towards sustainably managed water base, particularly for reduced imported water requirements and the costs associated with those. So an update for this analysis, we distributed a scope of work for the analysis to the staff team and members of the TAC for their review and comments back in February. We received some very good comments, some very valuable insight onto what work that we're going to be doing as part of this. So those comments have been received and were incorporated. We have that revised scope of work available to distribute. We're currently preparing a draft write-up of the existing wastewater treatment plant facilities, existing uses, and the city's plans to create and expand the wastewater treatment facility. And the purpose of this write-up is to provide some clarification, as Steve has mentioned in previous meetings, to provide some clarification to all of the interested parties in the recycled water program, just in general about where the wastewater treatment plant is going and what sort of activity is currently undertaken to construct new treatment facilities. So that write-up is being worked on now. We're hoping to have it ready for distribution to the city and the staff to act by the end of this. And after that, we're going to continue working on our analysis per our scope of work. So that's all I have, Steve, unless you have anything else to add.
Steve may be muted.
Sorry. I don't break up because I'm muted. At the end, Joseph, you broke up just a little bit. The intent would be to release that draft of the first couple sections, hopefully by the end of this week. Thank you, Joseph. Good stuff. Moving on to the next PowerPoint, and Joseph's going to hang around. I think he has more stuff later. Moving on to the next PowerPoint, it has to do with the with the Navy Coastal projects, and Steve Reich is actually the lead on these projects, doing a very, very good job coordinating everybody on the Navy Coastal project. There he is. I knew Steve had another call that was going to carry him until about noon, so Steve's on. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. I apologize because I can't see the slide right now, so hang on a second. I think the best thing to do is to start with, and I apologize again, I can't read the slide. Is that the 2021?
Correct. That's 2021 first.
Yeah, so 2021, I believe on, it was March 21st or March 24th, we had completed a biological study and turned that into the Bureau to complete the permitting application. That's under review right now. I know we expect to, or we hope to get the final permitting done by the end of this month. And so that's kind of where we're at right now on that project. We do have a driller that we've chosen. We do have a work plan, and we're putting that together. The only thing that we'll have to do in the fall is prior to drilling would be to obtain county permits for the wells themselves. But we're moving right along. My understanding is once it gets through archaeological review, there will be a 7 or 10-day comment period. Gene, do you remember how long that comment period is? So that's kind of where we're at right now. If there's any questions on that. I'm just.
This is Commander Benson. I have a question real quick. Do you know when you anticipate getting with us? We had an estimated cost on that for the Navy. Do you have the timeline when we think we might see the final for that?
For the Rose Valley wells, I expect to would be at the end of this month.
Great, thanks. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So no, we got the final drill bids and water quality testing, permitting, all that. It's all put together. So, but my understanding is we're staying inside that $300,000 allocation.
Great. That was really my concern, just to make sure that we stayed within the budget. Over.
Yeah. No, we're staying inside the budget. So there has been a slight change, and I think it's due to costs. But one of the things that we're looking at is originally we had talked about drilling 3 wells, and because of the cost of the drilling the 3 wells, one of the things that we're looking at is drilling 2 wells and rehabbing a 3rd existing well that's out there. So, the bids that we got back from the drilling contractors did not allow us to stay in the budget. And so in order to adapt that budget, adapt the project where we still have a complete and usable project that meets the goals that were originally intended, we're looking at the development of, the construction of 2 new wells and the rehabilitation of a 3rd.
Great, thanks for the update.
Yeah. If we want to move on to COSO FY22, last month I circulated a list of projects to the TAC committee, and I got some really good responses. I got some really good responses from Don Decker and from the district, and I think what we found from that was there's in order to develop a actual project, in order to investigate sustainability and availability of water, what we're looking at now is a kind of a 2-year project where year 1, which would be the FY22 COSO, would be a study, and year 2, which would be FY23, would be installation of monitoring wells. The goal of the project, again, will be to quantify recharge coming off the Sierra Nevadas. And so right now there appears to be a lack of information regarding that connection between the canyons and the discharge coming off that area and the valley floor and the regional aquifer itself. One of the things that are missing is that geometry and hydrogeologic or lithologic section and fault boundaries that define that relationship between the recharge and the regional aquifer. So the year 1 study is a geophysical survey to identify both the geometry, lithology, and fault boundaries along the boundary fault along the lower portion of the eastern Sierras, including looking at geochemistry and other tasks to support that study, so that we can then identify those locations, specific locations where monitoring wells could be installed to measure both the gradient and the flow and quantify that flow and its relationship between the mountain block and the regional aquifer. So I've just put together a work plan and a bid from a geophysical contractor to define that boundary, and that's again something that will probably be wrapped up here in the next week to 10 days, but prior to the end of April.
Perfect. That's excellent, Steve. Thank you. And for everybody who's on board, Steve will be back in just a minute to talk about the percolation study with a short report. So I will go on to the next one, which is the shallow well mitigation program. The item is, let's see, 7F, shallow well impact mitigation program update. Pretty short update for you because we have an agenda item later, agenda item 8, which is an action item. The first one just indicates that we do have a report form. It's been on the block for about 6 to 8 weeks. We had 2 rounds of comments, redrafted and sent back out for comments. We did just receive some comments from Eddie Teasdale off of a member of the TAC. I just got those yesterday, and I sent something back to Eddie that they were actually due in March, but we're still going to look at them. I mean, we always want good comments and good information. But this, we're showing up there just the final draft that we have of the report form, and the fact that we have received comments, and it is an action item on the agenda right after the Water Resource Manager report to basically ask the board to approve the report form so we can actually post it for folks that want to report to the authority impacts to their shallow wells. So the next PowerPoint is an update. Normally Heather would do this, but it's very short right now. Heather, you guys all remember Heather Steele. She's back working hard again. She actually brought her new son by. I got to meet little Mr. Steele. Pretty nice guy, although I made him cry, but he's a pretty good kid. He's a pretty nice little boy. So Heather should be on, and she'll be reporting later under the annual report. But just quick right now, the process is underway to develop the program. There were some comments about whether we should do an outline or a program. It was our thought that we should actually have a document that goes before the board, goes for the TAC, goes for the staff team, a document that talks about what the shallow well impact, identification, evaluation, and mitigation program really is, so that it goes into the files with the authority for the long term. So we're not trying to make it a big project just to make it a comprehensive document describing what the program is. As you can see up there, Heather is working on that. She will be the one presenting as we bring documents to the staff team, to the TAC and then to the board for them to review. She's working on the components, which are nature and cause of well failure, historical and current groundwater levels, what the issues are, water quality issues and how water quality relates to impacts, and the evaluation of the owner versus the authority, where the responsibilities lie. So all of those will be included. So this is just an update to let you know we are working on that, and to let you know that our key staff person on that is Heather, and she's on the line. She'll be on a little bit later. So that's it for just a quick update on the shallow well impact mitigation program. The next PowerPoint has to do with the surface percolation replenishment study. I know Steve is just barely getting his team together to get going on that, but maybe just a short report from Steve.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You know, I put these slides together last week, and since I put this slide together last week, we actually got started going on it. And so, you know, I apologize for it being so short, but, you know, the good news is that we were able to really dig into, I think, a couple key studies, or at least one key study that's out there, which is the Krieger and Stewart 2008 report. And that was really, I think, a good piece of work that we want to build off of. And so, you know, we've been going through, and I think a lot of the assumptions and a lot of the ideas about percolation, where percolation can occur, what are the problems, what are the constraints, I think it really helps focus. And so our goal right now is to build off of this existing work that I think is really good. And what that's doing is it's focusing us into specific areas, mainly within the El Paso Basin along some of the drainage areas. And so what we want to do is look at those recommendations, refine them a little bit more. We'll come through with the analysis, the ability to, you know, recover the water, the losses, the water balance, and so forth. But we really we've had that opportunity to get started. We're getting going, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we're looking at that study. We're looking at the LADWP on their recharge study, and we're building off those studies and going forward with the recommendations that were identified in that. So I know by next month we'll certainly be more prepared to give you kind of an indication of what we're finding, but certainly I think we have a very good starting point.
Great. That's great, Steve. Just to follow up again, this is part of some comment that Don Decker had earlier. Getting input from the TAC, as Steve mentioned, was important. We got some good information and some good guidance and direction. That's always helpful. We actually enjoy and respect the information we're getting from the experts up there. Folks that have been up here doing that. And then going forward, I'll make sure the TAC knows, Don, I know they're not having meetings right now, and the rest of the TAC, I know we're not having meetings right now, but we are committed. I know Steve is, I know I am. We're committed to making sure we get not only our staff team input, but technical basis, the advisory committee. You guys will be involved in the steps as we go forward. So that's all good. Okay, thank you, Steve. Moving to the next PowerPoint, which is kind of an interesting one. We kind of thought that we ought to get going on this because we are now in, something just fell off my desk. We are now into calendar year 2021 pumping. So this is what we're calling a preliminary 2021 allotment of sustainable yield. And I know this has been kind of a sensitive topic, but we thought we had to get this information out because it does affect certain people. It certainly affects the water district. We thought this was important that the water district get a handle, get a look at what we're looking at as part of the GA staff team. This evaluation, and this is just preliminary allotment, this is just a look at things because it really depends on what actual pumping occurs this year by other pumpers. But this evaluation was based on the Sustainable Yield Report, which has been prepared and reviewed and approved by the board. This is based on the engineer's report associated with the replenishment fee and the ordinance that was adopted related to the replenishment fee on how we'd be looking at this kind of production and how we would allot the sustainable yield. Based upon the ordinance and the engineer's report that was adopted, the groundwater needed by the Navy has been given, in this preliminary evaluation, has been given a first priority for that allotment for what they need as part of sustainable yield. Then the remaining sustainable yield that we have applies primarily to the intent is to provide it to Navy uses outside of the base, which this has been talked about before. It's included in the engineer's report. And then ultimately, once we have the allotment, the actual use of pumping by the Navy, basically the rest of it would be allotted to the water district to reduce their replenishment fee, so if they know what their pumping is going to be and whatever portion of the sustainable yield they have, they can estimate what their replenishment fee might be. So that was the intent, was to give some guidance. So what we provided here was a very brief methodology and then some preliminary numbers. So I'll just read through the methodology real quick because it's pretty short. Just basically, we totalized actual 2020 pumping by the Navy Channel Lake, de minimis pumpers, which is an estimated number, City of Ridgecrest, Kern County, and Kern, the Community Services District, the small mutuals, and Froma domestic use, and then deduct that total pumping from available 2021 sustainable yield, the 7650. The remaining sustainable yield is then applied to the water district. And if you look at the next slide, you can see how we've done this. We actually reached out to the Navy. We've received a formal response from the Navy. So you'll see on the top of the chart, Navy has reported 2020 pumping. We have documented the reported pumping at 1,436 acre-feet. The rest of the pumping we have there is estimated and reported from last year, so we get a feel for where these folks are at to estimate what may be left for the water district. Ultimately, total of 3,161 acre-feet is basically carved out of the sustainable yield, with the remainder at the bottom. You can see the calculation, the remainder being 4,489 acre-feet, roughly as estimated, would be available to the water district as part of the sustainable yield for this calendar year. So that's just it's an estimate, and the whole intent here was to provide information really for the water district so they could do financial planning. So that's what that was for. Okay, the next water resource manager PowerPoint has to do with the annual report. This may take a little bit because a fairly detailed review of the annual report was put together in a PowerPoint. Heather, if you're on, ready to go. So thank you, Heather.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I will be presenting the GSP annual report that we submitted this year for 2021. This was for water year 2020, which covers October 2019 to September 2020. So first, to give you some background on the report, this is a STGMA requirement to submit an annual report to DWR annually by April 1st every year, and that report covers the previous water year. The major components of the report are progress towards sustainability, groundwater elevation data, and water supply data. DWR doesn't provide a template for that. They allow the GSAs to create a document that works best to document the management of their own basin. So for the status of the annual report, the first report was submitted in May 2020. That covered water year 2019.
Sorry to interrupt. Please put your computer. Sorry. Again.
Is that better? The first report was submitted in May of 2020 to cover water year 2019. That was slightly later than April 1st deadline because an extension was given to all the GSAs for due to COVID-19 delays. And as of now, we have still not received any comments from DWR on that report. The current report is for Water Year 2020. As I said, we submitted that on April 1st. And this report had to be a bit restructured from the previous one because this is the first report reporting to DWR since the GSP has now been adopted. We did provide a draft of the report to the staff and TAC members for their review too. And I do want to make mention that many of the data, if not all, is available publicly on the DMS site. And I can just remind and encourage everyone to go and access the DMS. It's very useful information there. The DMS website, just as a reminder, is www.iwbgsp.com. So moving to the next slide, the report organization. It's organized as follows. There's the executive summary, background information, which includes general information about the IWBGA and the groundwater basin, progress towards sustainability, which includes the update on projects and management actions and tracking of the sustainable management criteria, hydrologic conditions, groundwater elevation data, water supply data, and other data collections. Moving to the next slide, progress towards sustainability. As I said, that contains updates on all of the projects and management actions that and everything that's been accomplished in Water Year 2020. So for management action number 1, which was allocations, transient pool, and fallowing program, I wanted to update you that there was significant work in Water Year 2020 done on that management action. Resolution number 06-20 was adopted by the board. That report documented the sustainable yield of 7650 acre-feet per year. And additionally, Ordinance 03-30 was adopted, which established the basin replenishment fee, and Resolution 05-20 was adopted, which adopted the transit pool and fallowing program. So significant work was done for that management action. The next slide, we have project number 1, which was imported water supply. As you know, Capital Core Group has been retained, and they have been working to identify options for water transfers. They did, in Water Year 2020, began coordination with interconnection opportunities, and they identified potential funding sources. And as previously mentioned, Ordinance 03-30 was adopted to establish the basin replenishment fee. An update on project number 2, optimized recycled water use. Initial program development and coordination between the authority and the city of Ridgecrest occurred in Water Year 2020. For project number 3, conservation, the implementation of the SDAC conservation program began, and that's continuing in this year as well. And of course, the Water District is always implementing their conservation efforts. Next slide, for project number 4, the shallow well mitigation program. During Water Year 2020, it was initial program development, and also Ordinance 03-30 was adopted, and that basin replenishment fee will be used to fund the shallow well mitigation. So project number 5, dust control mitigation, and project number 6, pumping optimization. No work was completed in Water Year 2020 other than just the general GSP program development. Next slide. Moving on to the sustainable management criteria. First, I wanted to give just a brief refresher on the criteria and what they mean. We have minimum thresholds, which are the minimum levels to not have undesirable results occurring in the basin. We have measurable objectives, which are the desired goal levels that we will need to achieve by 2040. And that range in between the minimum threshold and the measurable objectives is called the operating range. So that operating range takes into account flexibility for different hydrologic conditions that happen annually. And then as we're working towards meeting those measurable objectives by year 2040, we have interim milestones. And those are target goals that are established in 5-year increments up until 2040. So there are no annual goals or thresholds that were required to be met in water year 2020. So we are just documenting progress towards sustainability and towards reaching that first target, which would be the interim milestone in year 2025. For chronic lowering of groundwater levels, we do have 4 key sites that are currently above the measurable objective, the groundwater levels, so they are even better than what we had anticipated. There are 4 key sites that are in that operating range between the measurable objective and the minimum threshold. And we have 2 key sites that currently we don't have enough data, and we're collecting that data so that we can establish the sustainable management criteria at those key wells. So currently there's no indication of concern and no indication that we will not be meeting the first interim milestone in year 2025. Moving on to the next slide for loss of groundwater and storage. The sustainable management criteria there is measured as a cumulative loss in the 5-year increments for the interim milestones. I will talk about more later in the presentation how we calculated that loss of storage. Next slide is degraded water quality. So for degraded water quality, we measure specifically TDS concentrations, and TDS acts as a key indicator for other water quality degradation. We have 5 key sites that are currently below the measurable objectives. They are the TDS levels are not of concern there. We have 1 key site that's within the operating range between the measurable objective and minimum threshold, and we have 4 key sites that currently we have limited data and we do not have sustainable management criteria established there. And the same with chronic lowering of groundwater levels. There's no indication with the data that we do have that we will not be meeting our first interim milestone in 2025. Moving on to the next slide for land subsidence. We have identified the snort facility on North China Lake. That is a key site that is vulnerable to land subsidence. And no other representative sites have been selected within the basin to be annually measuring land subsidence. As data sets become available, we certainly will be evaluating the basin as a whole and looking at the data as that comes in. And periodically we will be requesting data from China Lake to see what they've been observing in terms of land subsidence. But currently we don't have any new data to report on that. Next slide. Now I'll be going into the hydrologic conditions that we've observed. This chart shows the water year type classifications based on percent exceedance of normal. This data is from 1945 until 2020, and it shows that normal precipitation at the North China Lake Station in the center of the valley is between 2 to 4 inches a year. Next slide shows recently historical water year types based on the precipitation. For 2020, 5.57 inches were recorded, which represents an above normal year. Next slide. Now going into discussing groundwater elevation data. KCWA has produced fall 2019 and spring 2020 groundwater elevation contours. As expected and as we know based on our understanding of the basin, the groundwater flows from Rose Valley, the Sierras, the Argus Range, and the El Paso subarea towards the playa at the center of the basin. And pumping centers, of course, form depressions in those regions. We didn't observe very much variation between the fall 2019 and the spring 2020 contours. I will note there was limited data for the spring 2020 groundwater levels, and I'll discuss that more later too. Moving on to the next slide for hydrographs. Hydrographs have been developed for all wells in our monitoring program, and they are All are posted on the DMS website, so the public can view those. COVID-19 did cause difficulties with access and the availability to sample. And so because of that, many of the water levels were sampled later in spring, in April and May, instead of in March of 2020. And due to this delay, not every, the spring high was not captured at every monitoring point as what we would have hoped. For USDR 03, we did want to point out, they're looking at the groundwater elevation data for that well. There was a discrepancy observed between the shallow and mid-level piezometers. That error seems to have occurred during or immediately after well construction. And we did provide a tech memo that explained that issue more thoroughly and included that as an attachment to the annual report. Moving on to the next slide for groundwater and storage. Using the water levels that are taken at monitoring points throughout the basin, the change of groundwater and storage can be calculated using the Tyson polygon method. And that is based on the spring water levels at 41 wells. And so wells are chosen based on their period of record and distribution throughout the basin. And these polygons then are formed, and the change of storage is calculated in each polygon. So this method provides a weighted average of change of groundwater storage based on all those observed groundwater levels. The table shows the calculated annual change of storage for water year 2016 through water year 2020. So the water year 2020 is on the right in that table, and that is highlighted in red. I do want to qualify that a bit. It was brought to our attention during the review period that when the TAC was reviewing the report, that some of the water levels that we used to calculate the change of storage, they were not actually static water levels, and they were already, groundwater levels at those sites had already lowered a bit due to the seasonal agricultural pumping. So we weren't able to capture the spring high because of that delay I mentioned previously with COVID. So because of those COVID restrictions, we had to sample late, and because of that, the water year 2020 change of storage really can't be accurately calculated. And it's not really a good comparison to the water year 2019 change in storage. So the spring, this calculation uses the available data, what's shown here, and it shows an overall loss of storage of 16,500 acre feet. But because some of this data is not static water levels and it was already influenced by the early seasonal agricultural pumping, that value really does over-exaggerate the loss of storage that actually occurred in water year 2020. So we are taking steps to revise the annual report, and we're going to make note of that, qualify those numbers and make note of that. Next slide. This chart shows the annual average groundwater change from water year 2015 to water year 2020. It's color-coded, and you see in the legend, the dots that are green show
So we will resume the meeting.
Would you like me to continue?
Yes, is everybody back on? We're going to go ahead and start. And
Oh, we got it back. Good job, April and Jerry.
yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank you guys. We have PowerPoints on our screens and
Good. Okay, so I was on
Okay.
slide 17, the
Heather?
estimated ground. Yeah.
I hate to interrupt you. April was asking if you could start back a couple slides.
Oh, okay. Yes. Do you know what slide you'd like me to start on?
I'm not sure exactly when the feed went down, so maybe just go a couple slides back to be safe. I'd say the groundwater elevation data, 15 would probably be a good start.
15. Okay. Okay. So the groundwater in storage can be calculated using the Tyson polygon method. This method uses all the wells distributed from the basin to form polygons and provides a weighted average of the change of groundwater storage based on the annual observed groundwater levels at each of those points. So this table shows the calculated annual change of storage from water year 2016 to water year 2020. So on the far right, the water year 2020 change of storage, those values are highlighted in red because I do need to qualify them. It was brought to our attention during the TAP review of the report that some of the water levels used to calculate the change in storage were actually not the static groundwater levels, and they had already lowered some due to the seasonal agricultural pumping that had already started. I previously mentioned that there were restrictions and access issues because of COVID-19 during the spring sampling event. So what should have been sampled in March ended up needing to be sampled in April and May, and that delay made it so that some of those groundwater levels were actually not static groundwater levels. So the value shown in the table, it was calculated based on the available data, and it shows an overall loss of 16,500 acre-feet in water year 2020. But that actually does over-exaggerate the loss of storage, the true loss of storage in water year 2020. So we are taking steps to revise the annual report to really make note of this, highlight this problem that I was discussing, that since we had those issues with sampling, so that really does explain this value. It's not a good comparison to water year 2019 because the water year 2019 data was taken at the seasonal spring high levels, as they should be, the static groundwater levels. Next slide. This chart, or this figure, shows the average annual groundwater change from water year 2015 to water year 2020. I do want to make note that the spring 2020 groundwater sampling impacts that I discussed previously are reflected on this too, in that annual average change. So the largest decline in groundwater levels, they are represented by the orange, more yellow and more orange dots. Those were observed at USBR 3. That's located in the southwest pumping center. Stable groundwater levels, that's represented by the green, and no change with the blue. Those stable groundwater levels, that was observed in the wells in the El Paso sub-area, where there's very limited pumping, and in the southwest area near Ridgecrest, where historical pumping that has been there in that area has been reduced when the water district moved its production, and so that area has stabilized. The average change over all the wells in the basin was a loss of a reduction of 0.7 feet per year. Okay, next slide. This chart shows the annual and cumulative loss of storage since water year 2015. The blue, both the dash and the solid, those represent the main Indian Mills Valley Basin, and the red, reddish-orange color, that represents the El Paso sub-area. So the solid blue would be the cumulative loss of storage, it's water year 2015, and the solid red is the cumulative loss of storage in the El Paso sub-area. But in El Paso area, it's actually a cumulative gain in storage there. Green bars show the groundwater extraction in water year 2019 and water year 2020. We didn't show the loss of storage in water year 2020 on this graph because of all the difficulties in calculating that I've discussed previously and the inaccuracies in that. So next year, it'll just be they'll be able to show a loss of storage over the 2 years, for over water year 2020 and water year 2021. And so there's really no impact to our sustainable management criteria because that's measured only in the 5-year increments, and it's a cumulative loss that we're going to be looking at. So we'll still be able to track that accurately. Next slide. Now we'll be moving on to discuss groundwater extraction data. We use all the best available data and sources available to the Groundwater Authority to estimate how much pumping has occurred in water year 2020. So it's currently reported by using meters, it's electrical meters, some estimates are based on land use and some are based on population. In March of 2020, Ordinance 01-20 was adopted, and that does require water meters on all non-de minimis wells. So over time, as that's all implemented, and once we get a full year of data with that, groundwater extraction data after that ordinance has been adopted, we will be having even more accurate estimates of groundwater pumping in the basin. Next slide. This table shows the groundwater extraction in water year 2020, both the reported pumping and the estimated pumping. So our total estimated pumping for water year 2020 is 22,000 acre feet. That is a reduction compared to estimated pumping in 2019. So there's a difference between reported pumping and estimated pumping because as you know, not all pumpers are required to be reporting to the Indian Valley, and there's always just going to be inaccuracies in reporting. There's always data gaps in that. So we try to fill that in with all the best available sources we have to develop the estimated pumping and to determine that 22,000 acre feet for water year 2020. The next slide. There is some recycled water use in the basin too that occurred in water year 2020. An estimate of 1,330 acre feet was used. That is for landscape irrigation, agricultural irrigation, the partial maintenance of the Mojave to chub habitat, and the remaining is discharged to evaporation and population ponds. Next slide. So the total water use then is estimated to be 23,330 acre feet in water year 2020. Next slide. In our report, we do also document all of the other data collection tasks that occurred in water year 2020. We did receive, as you know, Prop 1 funding for many of these tasks, and so significant progress was made in water year 2020 to close a lot of the data gaps that we have in the basin. So these tasks included water quality sampling, isotope sampling, installation of 2 precipitation stations, retrofit of 2 existing stream gauges, aquifer testing, installation of remote monitoring telemetry equipment at some of our key wells, and video logging of monitoring wells. In-kind services were provided for that by Sparrows Valley Mineral. Next slide. This slide just documents some a summary of some of the tasks that we are going to be continuing in the next water year that we're currently in, water year 2021, and that is continuing making the DMS better and improving that for our basin management. Reevaluating the representative monitoring sites, and for the ones that don't have criteria established, we will be looking at that and establishing criteria. We will continually be making progress on developing and implementing projects and management actions and any other additional data collection that will be needed to fill those data gaps. And installation of additional data loggers as needed, and we might be coming back to the board with more recommendations of some of these data loggers. The purpose of those would be to prevent some of the issues that we had this past year with restrictions on getting the water level samples. So if we had data loggers, we'd be able to prevent those issues from happening again. That's the update on the annual report. I know there was a lot here, so I'm assuming there'll be some questions too.
Had a great report. Thank you. I wanted to acknowledge, too, Jean Moran and Nicole of our staff who had to work with to get this annual report together. I know they for all of you, they've done an awful lot of work on this annual report. And, again, we would have loved to have a little more review time, and we will work on that. We promise to work on that even more next year. We had more this year than last year, but there were some folks that said still not enough time. And the other note to make on this is that this year, there weren't a lot of observations to be made related to the GSP and implementation. There was more observation to be made just with another year of operating in the basin. Hopefully, by next year when we do an annual report for 2021, there will be some reduced pumping. There will be some things that have been implemented, and we'll be able to report a little more on performance of the GSP and some of the actions that were taken. So I want to get that in. I want to also point out, I said during the little break that Judy Decker had a couple questions. Jean Moran was on the line, and she copied me on it, but she did respond to Judy with a text with answers to those questions. So I think, Mr. Chairman, it might be appropriate for the Water Resources Manager report if we ask the board or the public if they have any questions before we go forward.
So I was going to bring it back to the public comment first, and then bring it back to the board. But does anybody have any questions to this at this point? Okay.
Scott, you became very hard to hear.
Okay. Well, okay. Hopefully you can hear me better now. I'm going to go ahead and open that up to public comment for item number 7.
Go ahead, caller.
Caller, go ahead.
Yes, this is Judy Decker. I have many comments. I won't give them all. I think today's meeting is a wonderful example of why we should open your meeting to the public. We have probably heard only about 50% of today's meeting. My first comment is on your annual report, Heather. I do not believe you can count recycled water as additional water pumped because it was already pumped and used. So that number needs to be taken off. I have another question. My question is, your measurements in the El Paso Basin, how many wells were measured there? Because there are very few. I have a question for Steve. This goes way back. Has the GSP been approved by the state yet? And do you have any indication of if it will be or when it will be approved? And my final comment, because I'll save the others, is to you, Mr. Heyman. When we have a report like this, like number 7, where there are so many items, I think it would be appreciated by the public and perhaps the board also if you would have questions at the end of each one. or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
If I might, Chairman Heyman, I can answer the one question she made, so we'll direct it right at me on DWR. Thank you, Judy. We have not received anything back from the state yet on the GSP. As you know, we did receive comments from the State Water Resources Control Board, but they were made to the state, not to us, but we did receive those, so it's part of the state. They actually have, by the SGMA regulations, we submitted on time. They have to the end of this calendar year to respond. Thank you.
Okay, next caller. Caller, go ahead.
Go ahead, caller.
Hello, this is Renee Stilusk. I'm not understanding how you got those figures on page 60. The top graph has the groundwater extraction data, and I noticed that there seems like there's a repeated 1,410 in the estimated pumping, and that's equivalent to the federal. How come it appears again in that same column under domestic? There's no explanation of how you got that estimated pumping, and then I don't understand how you got to the recycled water. Does that include the water for the golf course on base and the city using recycled water to water landscape and things like that?
Steve, do you want to take a...
I don't know. If you have answers to those questions, probably better than me.
Yes, so I was trying to know what page you were talking about, all of them. But the recycle water question, that does include all the landscape irrigation, which includes the golf course and what the city does to use recycle water for landscape irrigation. And I didn't catch what slide. I think it was the groundwater extraction data for domestic, if you had a question on that. So for the reported pumping of the 550 acre feet, that includes only what's the pumpers that are required to report, and it's a self-reporting process, so we don't necessarily have everyone reporting. Why it increases in the estimated pumping because we also need to then add in the individual domestic pumpers who are not required to report their pumping, but they are included in the estimated pumping for the whole basin.
Okay, let's move to the next caller.
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, this is Don Decker. I have several comments that primarily relate to details and the annual report itself. The basin calculations are based upon details of the actual aquifer, not just basin. That whole calculation package was not reviewed by the PAC, and I have serious reservations about the numbers that are there, especially the El Paso basin itself, about which we know a lot less than we do our main basins. The omission of the review has repercussions, not just now, but as we go along. It absolutely needs to be sent to the TAC. I have not seen any of the groundwater numbers that went into any of these calculations myself, and I don't know about the other TAC numbers. I have made numerous comments about the distribution of the critical wells that are being monitored for the purposes of these calculations, and the Southwest, which is the heavily pumped area by the water district, is underrepresented in a very serious way, as is the old Ridgecrest field, that is south of Ridgecrest proper, and including what we used to call the Bowman field to the southeast. There is no sampling going on. And at the same time, we're oversampling the El Paso Basin, which is not part of our water supply at this point at all, and probably never will be. So I'm making this public, my criticism of these of the sampling wells, and I think that the board should be fully aware of that defect. I realize completely it's not easy to necessarily establish wells for this purpose. However, 2 wells that have gone dry that have not been re-drilled, the old Bucket well and the old Emiel well, are both high on, I think, anybody's list that really is interested in understanding what is going on. Those 2 wells need to be replaced with wells deep enough to reach water. They both went dry some years ago. We have decade after decade of data from those wells that would be invaluable to be able to continue on with. I think that's what I've got for the time being, and I should stop work that. I've got a lot more, and I will send a report to the GA on exactly what I'm talking about, plus a substantial amount of additional information in another day or so. And, you know, tell you the truth, those of us that are really paying attention and trying to follow all of this, the total number of hours that we're contributing here is almost to the point of being out of hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Next caller.
Go ahead, caller.
Hi, this is Kimberly Bifat. I'm sorry, there's a lot of feedback. So my question has to do with being able to view the report that is going to be submitted. It sounds like the report, at least based on the slides, was submitted, but I thought I heard during the presentation before it went out that revisions are going to be made. I was just wondering, for the public benefit, if there's any chance that we could see the full report instead of the summaries that are presented in the slides before the revised version is submitted.
The annual report has been submitted to DWR, and it should be already on the website. If not, it will be on the website. It is available on the website.
And I'll add, you can always access reports that are on the DMS, which is the website that I was referencing, iwvgsp.com. That's where all the water level data is, water quality data, and reports are all posted on there as well.
Okay, so if anybody wants to see the report, they can just go on to that website and view it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, next caller, please.
No more callers.
Okay. Seeing no further public comment, we're going to bring it back to the board for any questions or discussion.
Okay, I guess I'll go first if there's nobody else wants to jump in. I've got several comments and questions going back to 7E, which is the COSO royalty candidates. I wasn't real clear with regard to the future candidates in 22 and 23. Have those been actually selected, or are those just in candidates that are going to be selected maybe, or what's the story on those?
I don't know if Steve Reich is still on. Steve, are you still on?
Hey, this is John Doyle. For what it's worth, we're hearing almost nothing that comes through the host profile here. The volume needs to be turned up, or because really can't hear anything.
I can barely hear you.
Am I not getting close enough to the mic? Is that it?
Stan, I don't think that's the case. I think it really has to do with the volume settings of what is coming through the computer on that end right there.
Okay, great. Because it sounds in the room here that I am on the mic. Is there anybody from Stetson that can address the royalty candidates?
Yeah. You know, Stan. If you look at the second PowerPoint, and I apologize, it's mislabeled. It should say fiscal year 2022. It shows the recommended project is a 2-year investigation to characterize the quality of mountain front recharge with a description of year 1 and year 2, and that they're currently preparing the first year scope of work and cost in coordination with Commander Benson and Scott O'Neill and David Janis. So if you look at the second PowerPoint, it describes what is on the table. Now, this has also gone through the TAC and received comments from the TAC. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, and so these are more or less been selected at this point in time. As I think what I'm hearing, were there other candidates that were also involved?
Yes, there was a whole series of candidates. We got a lot of input, and this is what came out as the best candidates to put a scope and budget together for submittal to the Navy.
Okay. Well, I guess my point is, and will always be, that having monitoring wells is great. My feeling is that, and if the monitoring wells can provide information relative to production wells and maybe finding new water in our aquifer, that is what we really need. I'm not against monitoring wells, but I would like to see more effort put into, and I don't have any idea what actually went on in the process. If we could figure out a way to get any money that we spend focused a little bit more on trying to get augmented water, which is really what we need. Now, going on to item H, which is the original page 6 that I've got. Hopefully, it is the 2021 allotment of sustainable yield. I was on the domestic wells. There is a 800 acre-foot number that is stated to be estimated. Could you go over your estimation methodology a little bit?
That's the estimate that's been used for some time now for the de minimis wells that don't report.
So are those actually de minimis wells? It wasn't clear that these were the de minimis wells.
Yeah, that is intended to be the de minimis wells. We don't have reporting on those, so that's the estimate, yes.
Okay, don't we have an ordinance that requires de minimis wells to report pumping?
No, we don't.
No, we have no requirement for de minimis wells? I mean, they don't have to have meters. I understand that, but I thought all de minimis wells were required to actually report what they're doing. No? No. Where I'm coming from, just so you understand, and for next year in particular, is right now, my understanding is we have like 130 de minimis wells that we can actually count that are registered. And if we have 130 de minimis wells, I find it hard to believe that they're using 800 acre-feet of water. And it may be the water district is the only one that's concerned about this, but you have to understand that every 100 acre-feet means $200,000 to the water district. So it's important that we actually have a methodology that's not just reporting what was reported previously that never had a real basis to it that I can find. There may have been a basis to it at one point in time. We need to understand what that basis was. That was one of the primary issues the water district had when looking at the replenishment fee. Again, 100 acre feet, that's $200,000. That's a lot of money. So I would like to see next year that we have something besides a historical data point that we don't really understand, quite frankly, from what I can gather. Now, okay, going to I, 7I, the GSP report. I looked on the internet, on the Water District website. I found last year's report, but I didn't find this year's report. Is it going to be on that site? Anybody?
Director Latoya, I would expect that yes, it would be. It will be. If that's what was put last year, it will be this year. I think Heather and Jean coordinate that with April, yeah.
Okay, and are the TAC comments to that report going to be put on the internet?
We did not receive any written chat comments.
No.
We received just some verbal comments.
Yeah, and one of the comments was they'd like more time, and the comments that they may have, we are always open to receive.
Okay, well, I guess I'd like to kind of follow up with what Dr. Decker said earlier. The TAC and the PAC both need to get much more involved, and I understand the problems of COVID and everything, but this is a critical document, and it seems to me that it needs to have thorough review before it's sent out. May I ask, what document establishes the GSP report submittal procedures? Is it in our bylaws or resolution, whatever? I guess where I'm headed with this is I was a little bit surprised to find when I started reading through the data package that this annual report, which is one of the critical reports that the GEA is going to send out this year, it was sent out before it was reviewed by the board. It seems to me that that's not totally appropriate. I understand that you've got a lack of review time and that COVID has created problems for everybody, but it seems to me that we need to formalize our procedure for how the draft is reviewed, who reviews the draft, when it goes to the board, and when it's submitted to DWR. Ultimately, the GA board is responsible for the content of that document. Whether most of us understand most of what's in it or not, we can get our staffs to look at it and interact with the public and the TAC. And so I'll be talking about that later on. Page 8, the second page 8, has to do with the El Paso area, which is something that Dr. Decker already commented on. If you look at it at face value, I find my page 8, the El Paso area clearly shows that we've had an increase in water storage of almost 19,000 acre feet, which over 5 years, we're talking close to 4,000 acre feet per year increase. Now, I understand that Don is skeptical of that, and that's fine. My feeling is that we need to understand that area much better. If these numbers are correct, that's great. If Don's correct, then we need to correct the data. But in my mind, this tells me that what I have been hearing for the last 20, 30 years is that there is untapped water in the basin that may be in excess of the 7650 that we're currently talking about. And this, in my mind, is a critical issue that we need to explore and understand, and we have to have the TAC involved in that discussion. On page 10, that's the second page 10 in my handout, it has to do with the groundwater extraction data, and it lists a 22,000 acre feet as being the total for 2020. And I'm curious, was there any allowance for the ET on the playa in that 22,000 acre feet? Can you see where it says the title of the slide, and I've got a double slide page here. It's page 10. It's what went out in the data package. It lists a total of 22,000 acre feet, and I don't see any contribution due to the evapotranspiration on the playa.
If you'd like me to respond, no, evapotranspiration is not listed there. This is just groundwater extraction by pumping.
Okay. I don't know what's in the report, so I don't want to say too much until I read the report, but obviously if we're trying to look at a balance of inflow versus outflow, and we're using 7650 as the inflow, you can't ignore the ET when we talk about the outflow. So again, I'm not sure what the figure is for the table is for, but I hope that it's not trying to imply that we're only using 22,000 acre feet, because we are allowing an additional almost 5,000 acre feet to be evaporated on the playa. And my last comment, I guess, on the whole thing is, and I would agree with one of the, I think it was Judy Decker perhaps said, if the pages were numbered so that we could refer back to them and more, a little easier, that would be helpful. And by the way, I do like the when it shows up on my screen here, I can actually read the numbers on the various view graphs. On this paper, it's hard to see it, especially the one that shows the water increase or decrease with the colors and everything. I couldn't read it on the paper. So if there was a way of putting a number on each one of the view graphs and then them being consistent with what's being displayed, so that we all know which view graph we're talking about, that would be real helpful. Yeah, thank you, and that's all my comments.
Any other comments from the board? Okay, hearing none, we will thank you, Steve, and Stetson at Engineering, and Heather and Phil and everyone for your very thorough and nice presentation today. And so we're going to go ahead and move to item number 8, board consideration and approval of the shallow well impact mitigation report form. And again, Steve, this will be yours.
Yes, it will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the report form for shallow well impact mitigation. Oops, I'm on.
Steve, let me interrupt you for just a minute. I have to go back to public comment on comments from one of the board members here. So we'll go ahead and open back up to public comment. Caller, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello? Oh, am I speaking to the board?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Hi, yes, this is Kimberly Leafat. I submitted comments on item 7, but the phone call dropped before I could finish asking my questions. But my follow-up comment was, when I went on that website to try to view the report that was submitted for water year 2020, it's not there. So I just wanted to echo again one of what the other callers mentioned is there, because of all the technical difficulties we've been having today, and it looks like also on the website where the report was submitted, if there's a way to have it available on the authority's website at all, so that the public could provide comments on the specific language and the methodologies that went into the figures.
So Steve or Heather, do you have any comment on that?
No. Heather mentioned you can get it on a DMS site, but we have no problem putting it. If April, I don't know how complicated it is to put it on the website, but we have no problem.
It sounds like something.
I can't hear any responses.
Well, we're just kind of throwing it about on how difficult it would be to put on the website, but it seems like it's something that's doable to put it on the GA website, and it's stated that it is on the www.IW or GSP website, but apparently upon checking on it, it's not. So I don't know. We can follow up on that, but.
Yeah, and if she needs to, she can get in touch with April maybe to help her get access, or we can send it directly to her.
Okay. So Kimberly, we will work on that and make sure that it is viewable, on either or both of those websites.
Chairman Heyman, this is Phil Hall. One of Director Ratore's questions was related to de minimis and registrations of de minimis wells. That's been before the board several times. In fact, 3 years ago, I brought it to the board as a staff item, and it was, at that time, registration of de minimis wells was voted down. I believe it was a 4-1 vote with the county supervisor voting for registration, but maybe he didn't in the end. I'm not sure. Remember that vote. But then last year, we also brought it back. I should say I brought it back again as a staff item about March of last year. And we now do have a requirement that de minimis wells be registered, but there was quite a bit of a period in there where it was voted down too. So we've done a lot. We've done everything we can to get people to register, but we only have so much power and authority in that regard.
Okay, thank you for that. In addition, may I ask, is there in that same ordinance or resolution a requirement to report pumping? Because, that's obviously if they register but they don't report their pumping, it's not all that useful in terms of keeping track of pumping.
No, Sigma doesn't really give us the ability to require them to report their pumping because we can't put a meter on their property. So, because you can't put a meter on there, we can't. There's nothing for them to report. I will say that some actually have reported. We had one that came back with a variance recently. He was actually reporting his, even though it was de minimis to us. Didn't have to. But yeah, we're not able to put a meter on de minimis. The only way we would get to a meter on de minimis that we've talked about in the past is if we had good reason to believe that somebody was in fact not a de minimis. We could then use a meter as a reference to see if they were or were not de minimis. But de minimis have not had to register their wells. I think it's about a year now that they've had to. 2 years prior to that, it was the water district and the city were against the registration of de minimis wells at that time. This was after our meeting that was held out there in Inyo Kern, and that's where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Well, 800 acre feet is an awful lot of water. It's more than 10% of the total yield, assuming that the yield is the actual number, and that's the number we're going by. So we're talking 10% of more than 10% of the total yield, and we don't know who's using it or where they're using it. So I think maybe that should be another discussion item at some point in time.
Just so I'm kind of clear on where you're going with that, Stan. The de minimis users have X amount of water that they can use, correct? They're not to exceed a certain limit. And so are you saying that you, in the event that they're not using X amount of water, you want to use that water? Or
that would be a really good idea.
No, but I'm saying what
yeah,
try to be clear.
If there's 133 de minimis wells.
But de minimis it's already been established that de minimis users have a certain amount of water that they're allowed to use, and they don't have to have a meter, and they don't have to register. Take that back.
Yeah.
Let me clear that. Registration is something that we've pushed really hard to try to get everybody to register. So, but they don't have to have a water meter on that well. So I don't think there's anything to be looking at there.
Oh, I think there's serious something that needs to be looked at. Every 100 acre feet, that's $200,000, Scott. That's a lot of money to our ratepayers. Right now, we only know, as far as I know, the county only knows about 133 de minimis wells, and yet they're being allocated 800 acre feet. Now, you multiply 133 by 2, and you should come up with like 266 as the maximum that they can use. So there's a discrepancy between our understanding and knowledge of de minimis wells and the amount that they've been allocated. And without any documentation on where that 800 came from,
Wouldn't some of those wells be serving multiple de minimis users? So there might be multiple households on one well?
There certainly probably are, as a matter of fact. There are some co-op wells that we know that there are up to 4 legally. And there are probably some that have 3 and some that have 2. But you're talking many, many times what we can actually count of. So, and
Director Matura, this is Steve Eskessen. The number that has been used has been vetted through the TAC multiple times. It's not a brand new number. I don't know about your number of connections or de minimis connections, but we're not going to solve before you hear. But if you would like, we could send you documentation of where that number came from. But it has been vetted. It's not a brand new number.
Well, if you could find that documentation, I would certainly appreciate it.
You bet. You bet.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, none, so let's go ahead and you can resume, Steve, on item number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 8 is the report form for shallow well impact mitigation. And in sort of in follow-up to Director Rotola's questions, one of the requirements of us even reviewing this report form, shallow wells are typically small wells, de minimis wells. One of the requirements is that they have registered their wells. So part of the goal of this, one of the goals is to get more inclusion in our reporting of these shallow wells, small wells, de minimis wells. Anyway, I'll make this quick. There is a PowerPoint. I'm not going to go through it because it's a fairly long form right now, and we're just hoping people will fill out the appropriate information that they want us to review as part of a submittal on well impacts. But the shallow well mitigation program, there is a staff report, by the way, in your packet. It was approved by the board at its February 2021 meeting. The approved program included development of the shallow well impacts, identification, eradication, there's a typo there, evaluation and mitigation plan, which is underway now. We reported a little bit on that earlier. Heather is working on that, and the development of the shallow well impacts report form. And as I reported earlier, that report form has been rotated around, a lot of comments, good comments, especially from the TAC, that resulted in this form. It was reviewed for multiple weeks. The first draft of the report form was released to the staff team and to the TAC in early March, with comments requested by March 24th. It was about 3 weeks. Comments were received and incorporated as appropriate, and the final draft has been prepared by the staff and is included in the board packet. Under the staff report, the actions requested or required by the board, staff is recommending that the board authorize staff to finalize the report form based upon the board direction and approve the final report form and post the report form on the website for folks to use as a way to report potential impact. And again, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. So we'll bring it back to the public. So any public comment on item number 8, board consideration and approval of the shallow well impact mitigation report form?
Go ahead.
Hello, this is Renee Westerlusk. I have 2 questions. On page 3 of the form, they're under the disclaimer. These are legal questions, but what is the shallow well mitigation project paying for when in the disclaimer it listed the IWVGA is under no legal obligation to fund or mitigate any negatively impacted wells in the Indian Wells Valley? Because in the shallow well mitigation project, $1,750 are provided for from the basin replenishment fee, and on page 27 of the engineer's report for the adoption of the basin replenishment fee, it talks about mitigating locally desired, defined undesirable results that are due to unsustainable groundwater management that has occurred in the basin since 2015. And they said the purpose of the mitigation fee is to fund shallow well mitigation efforts in order to mitigate the undesirable results. So this disclaimer makes it sound like you're not using that $1,750 per acre foot of the replenishment fee to help out the wells that are adversely affected. That's my first question. And then the second one has to do with the phrase about confidentiality of the information that those choosing to fill out this form, it talks about release of information and data related to a public meeting will require public release information and data released to your completed report. I want to know, how do you get shallow well owners willing to report if they're worried about their privacy? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Chair Heyman, I can address the first one, which is a legal question.
Go right ahead.
I apologize. I have a leaf blower going on outside my window, so it was a little hard to hear. But from what I understand, the question is, in the disclaimer, it says that the agency has no legal obligation to mitigate any particular shallow well problem. And I think the question was, but you're collecting a fee to do that. Does that mean you're not going to spend the fee on those that purpose, or is that somehow inconsistent? And the answer to that is the fees that we collect for shallow mitigation well, the shallow mitigation well program have to be spent on that for that purpose under 218. That's a requirement. As far as whether or not we mitigate damage, claimed damage to a particular well, that's in the discretion of the GA. So we're not under an obligation to do it just because somebody has claimed something. We have a responsibility to independently review and prove that. And so that's letting people know that just because you claimed it doesn't make it so, and we're going to have to check it. And then we'll have to approve it. So we have discretion on as to how to spend those limited funds when it comes to choosing among the projects, but we don't have discretion to spend the funds on anything else. And I think the other question was for Steve, if I'm not mistaken. And thank you, Renee, by the way.
Steve Johnson, did you want to go ahead and try to answer her second question?
Yeah, I got distracted by another call that came in. What was the question again? I had the answer. What was it related to? It was related to, I know, it was confidentiality. Right. And Renee, the purpose of putting that in there is that we didn't want to inhibit somebody from submitting information thinking it might be shared. We wanted people to be comfortable providing information on their wells and what they were doing and what was happening. And if it resulted in an evaluation that didn't result in applying any mitigation fee or any mitigation measures to the well, then that information would remain confidential. Obviously, if we have to make a report through the board on what we're doing with the mitigation funds at a public meeting, then it would no longer be confidential. So the intent was to put some information in there that would make well owners more comfortable submitting the information, knowing from the get-go that if they do end up qualifying for the mitigation program and mitigation support, that the information won't be confidential after that. We'd have to do it in public. So that was the purpose. It wasn't to keep people from providing information. It was to help them feel comfortable about submitting information.
Thank you, Steve. Any other public comment?
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, am I on?
Yes.
This is Wes Kattenstein. How's everybody doing? I'd like to echo Nate's concern about the disclaimer. The first sentence, I think, really isn't what you want to say. The first sentence says, the IWVCA is under no legal obligation to fund or mitigate any negatively impacted wells in Indian Wells Valley regardless of the cause of impact. I think really what you should say there is that the GSP is in response to a state requirement to mitigate undesirable results, and that in fact the GSP does have and it's perhaps even legal obligation as written to fund and mitigate any appropriately damaged wells. So I think it's too strong of a statement. I think the second sentence and the following sentences soften, kind of let the world know that not because you want to claim it's not going to be fixed. I think that first sentence is far too strong. It pretty much says we're not going to do anything. And the reality is we're trying to mitigate undesirable results, and we do in fact have an approved plan to fund well repair as appropriate.
Thank you, Wes. Do we have any other callers?
Go ahead, caller.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes, this is Judy Decker. I have a couple of comments. This item that you are discussing mitigating the private well owner, domestic well owner, and your 2020 water report are two items that should have been, as Mr. Retora said, sent to the TAC committee. They are policy, especially this one. And I think it's a shame that you have neglected so to use the committee that you formed. You have also neglected to use the communication document that the policy committee developed when it was first formed. And finally, I'll comment to Mr. Retora. I can name you 130 private wells or co-op wells that exist between Mayhem Street and George Ranch Road, Ridgecrest Boulevard, and 178. So there are far more domestic de minimis wells than have registered. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next caller.
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, this is Don Decker. The question of how many of the affected, negatively impacted well owners will actually respond to the project that the PA is attempting to put in place here, the mitigation project. How many will actually respond to it is the open question. There are many wells that are failing through the years. There were 5 in the last year or so in a relatively small area, all related to declining water levels that we're aware of. The time I spent in trying to help step and rewrite and restructure the form and the information ahead of it was all related to trying to make the process more reasonable and acceptable to the private well owners that are in a very confused and disturbed state over the whole matter that we're undergoing here. It's the main reason that more of the wells aren't being registered. I have one last thing, and I'll make it very brief, but it relates to Stan Torres' questions having to do where did the 800 acre feet come from for the shallow well, the minimus wells. It came from the Todd report, and Stan Yates spent over 2 weeks going around from parcel to parcel on every street in the basin, looking at, taking note of the obvious water consumption, namely trees and landscaping and so forth. And with experience that he had in other areas, came up with a number that was somewhat over 1,000, but that included the mutual well systems also, which he was not able to separate. So that's why there is 800 as the estimated number, but it came from actual observation. If you read the audit report, you'll discover more detail there. I hope that answers that question. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any other callers? Okay, seeing no further public comment, we will move it back to the board for discussion and a motion.
Steve, I believe you said that you had distributed this to the PAC, pardon me, the TAC, but I didn't hear you say you had distributed it to the PAC. Can you tell me, was that done or not?
No, it was just done to the TAC. We figured, we figured it was more of a technical document, but not necessarily a policy document. So the policy had already been set by the board to address mitigation of impacted wells. So we wanted to technically make sure we had everything there. This form doesn't have to be in concrete either. If the board would like to send this out to the PAC or get other comments, we're open to it. This is intended to help facilitate communication. That's what it's for.
I guess just where I'm coming from is it looks a little formidable in some areas with all the detail that it wants. And I guess my feeling is that we need to encourage people to fill the document out. And I'm not sure that the way it's written actually encourages people just in the magnitude of work that has to be done. I was curious, would it be possible to put together 2 or 3 samples of filling one out for different types of failure modes so that people could get a look at it and say, oh, maybe that wouldn't be so bad after all, and we could fill that out, just so people know that it's not nearly as big a job, hopefully, as what it might appear.
I don't know, Director Torre, if you're directing a question to me, but as your water sources manager, I'd certainly do it if you asked me to, if the board asked me to.
It just seems to me that what we want to do is encourage the people, and anything that we can do to encourage people to fill it out, is in our best interest, as well as theirs. And if an example or 2 or 3 would help with that, I think we should include that.
We are actually, Director Torre, we are actually somewhat expecting that somebody who does fill this out, whether it's online or whether they fill one out and bring it in, from experience, we're actually expecting that it wouldn't be a one and done. It would likely be an exchange. After we've reviewed it, we may have questions and have to get back to them and exchange information. So we expected it to be an exchange back and forth to get the information we need to do the evaluation.
Yeah, well, then maybe some words like that in the document, might be helpful.
I believe that it is in there that we the authority, the water resource manager and the authority staff would exchange information back, or get back to them with any information, and that we may ask additional questions on their submittal. That was the intent.
Okay.
This is Chairman Heyman, and in my reading through it, I find it very presentable. I don't have any negative feeling out of it reading it, like it'd be a deferment to the well owners. So, and as far as the disclaimer, I think disclaimers are written typically by legal counsel, and it reads like a pretty normal disclaimer. So, personally, I'm in favor of moving forward with the form as it is, but I'd like to hear back from any of the board members.
Yeah, sorry for the holdup. I was just going back through it real quick, but no, I agree. I think it breaks down all the questions that we need answered and starts the conversation, and then the disclaimer seems like pretty standard boilerplate disclaimer language. So.
Yeah. Right. No, I wasn't saying that I was against it. And we can always change the form. You know, if we start having a lot of people trying to fill out the form and having trouble, then, you know, we can always go in and clarify what we really need. If we only need 80% of the data rather than 100% of the data, we can delete some stuff later on. And there will be things that people don't know, quite frankly, because a lot of the wells, I mean, we've tried to get data from the county, and the county doesn't know what's in the wells. So, and it'll be those older wells that are having the problems. So, you know, maybe what we should do is put it out there, try it, see what problems are being created for the well owners, and then a year from now or whenever, we'll go back and modify it based upon feedback that we've gotten.
Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Chair, this is John Blair. Are you looking for a motion?
Yes.
I'll go ahead and make the motion as staff recommendation.
I'll second it.
Vice Chair Rotora?
Aye.
Chairman Heyman?
Aye.
Director Itmeyer?
Aye.
Director Peters?
Aye.
Director Vallejo?
Aye.
Okay, we're going to now move on to item number 9, General Manager's Report. Carol, this will be yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So we'll start with the monthly financial update. I'm sure you noticed you didn't have a financial report in your packet this month. Apologize for that. Staff is still working on trying to develop a clear and understandable financial report for you, and we're still trying to gather up all of the financial data that we need that goes into that report. So for today, I just want to give you a few figures verbally. For February, as far as the extraction fees, we collected just under $53,000, and that was about $2,000 below our budgeted forecast of $55,000. So we were a little short in February on the extraction fees. In March, we're still collecting those fees because some of the payments are coming in late. So far, extraction fees for March totaled just over $45,000, but our forecasted amount was $125,000. So we're considerably short of that. Hopefully, we have more payments coming for March. For the February transient pool revenue, we received about $2,700, and for March, the revenue collected for the transient pool was $7,763. Also collected for March for the replenishment fee was approximately $50,500, and we talked earlier in the meeting about the water district's payment. All of their credit has been applied, and so they are now actually putting money towards their payments. So we did receive $50,500 for the replenishment fee. As long as we're here talking about finances, let me tell you that as far as delinquent accounts, we're working on that. April's working considerably on that, and our legal counsel is going to help us out and try to come up with a way to help us efficiently collect some of these delinquent accounts short of legal action. Of course, if we do have to go to legal action to collect, we'll try to do it in an efficient manner as well, because obviously we don't want to have to put a lot of time and money and effort into these. But we do need to come up with a way to more efficiently and effectively collect on these delinquent accounts and get the money, the cash flow coming in a little more regularly. So moving on, we'll go to the Capital Core Group's report. There's a report there in your packet. Not a lot of change from what we saw last month. Our CCG folks are working with Representative McCarthy's office to try to help us secure some funding, particularly in the Defense Community Infrastructure Program of the National Defense Authorization Act bill, which we expect this year. We expect that they're going to have markup hearings either this month or next month, and so CCG is working with not only Representative McCarthy but other members of the House and Senate to help us identify where we might be able to secure some funds. There are some additional federal opportunities that they're exploring for us, again noted in the report, as well as some state programs where there's potentially going to be some other grant opportunities available to assist groundwater sustainability agencies. So hopefully we'll see that come about later this year as well. And finally, the Capital Core Group is also continuing to help the staff determine where there may be some potential water supplies available to us for the future. And again, a good report from them available for you to read in detail in your packet. As far as our report on the SDAC programs, we have some reports here as well. As far as our leak detection, the program continues a lot of work for Trona. We've updated the work plan to identify, I believe, 6 additional small systems that are going to be investigated. So that work will be continuing this month. And then finally, the other part of the program was the water conservation program. We're not seeing very much action there again for March. I believe that is month 9 of a 10-month program. So hopefully next month we'll be wrapping that part of it up, and we're looking to try to move the funds remaining in that program over to the leak detection part of the program, where we can put those funds to good use in terms of identifying leaks and where we can have water savings throughout the various water systems. Let's see, finally, just a couple of items I wanted to mention for you. We did receive a notice from Kern County requesting that we prioritize the repayment of their advance. And so as we put together our financial plans, our staff will be working with the Kern County representatives on how best to address that. And finally, in reviewing our production statements, we've noticed that the Inyo Kern CSD production seems to have increased considerably over the past few years. So we are working with the folks at the CSD and others to try to determine the reason for that increase and to try to document it and sort it out. So I believe that is all I have.
Very good. Thank you, Carol. And at this point, we'll open up to public comment for the item number 9, General Manager's Report. Okay, seeing no public comment, bring back to the board, any questions or comments from the board?
No, sir.
Yes. First of all, I want to say I really appreciate your efforts to try to reorganize the financial report. That's been a sore point for 2 or 3 years. So anything you do, I'm sure will be an improvement and greatly appreciated. Second of all, I'd just like a question on the transient pool. Do we have a buyer for transient pool water at this point in time?
Maybe I should address that. We wouldn't have a buyer because it's not our water to sell. That it's up to people in the transient pool to sell their water. And I guess to answer your question, we have not been notified by any of them that they're in the process of trying to make any kind of sale of any of that water. Does that answer your question, Stan?
More or less. I have heard third hand that there are people trying to sell water. What I haven't heard is that there is anybody willing to buy the water. I'm fully aware that the Groundwater Authority is not in a position to buy that. But you sort of answered most of it. But I think there are people out there that would be willing to sell if indeed there was a buyer. And I'm not aware of any buyer. That was the point. And it sounds like you're not aware of a buyer either.
Well, I have not been personally involved in any of those discussions. I have it on good authority that they have taken place and are taking place.
Okay.
But as far as the authority's involvement, we have not yet been approached with any completed or negotiated sale.
Okay. Okay, that answers it. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a caller, so we'll go and take public comment.
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, this is Renee Westnusk about the Water Conservation Rebate Program for the disadvantaged community. I just wanted to know, is this the end of the program, and is there no longer going to be any more outreach efforts made to the people in the area that would qualify, and has enough outreach been done?
It's my understanding that this is the last month now of the program, and I don't know very much about it beyond that. I think that would be the end of it, and I would expect a summary end of program report. There may be others who can tell you more about the program.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further public comment, any other questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you, Carol. So with that, we'll move to item 10, which is closing comments. So we can start to our left here with Supervisor Peters.
No comment from me.
Mr. Flora?
Yes. Our next meeting, I believe, is May 12th. I would like to see some people in the audience here come May 12th. I would in particular like to see the leaders of the PAC and the TAC here, and maybe even each of them give a short report on what is happening in the PAC and the TAC over the time frame that they haven't been here. I'd also like to see an agenda item on the, doesn't necessarily have to be next month, but in an upcoming month, that talks about the procedure for the review and release of the annual GSP report. My feeling is that the GA is ultimately responsible for the content of that report, and it should be authorized, reviewed and authorized by this board before it's sent out. Also, one last item. I would like to see, now that we have a single general manager, I would like to have a discussion on hiring one general counsel for the GA. I think it would be a lot easier for the general manager to work with one GA, and that way we could have 5 consulting counsels from the various agencies that are represented here, but wouldn't have to take inputs from 5 different folks on every issue. It's something that we've discussed in the past, and it's something that the Water District would like to go to, is a single general counsel. Obviously, we're going to have special counsel, Mr. Markman. That's a separate issue. But I think the Water District would generally like to see just one general counsel for the GA. Thank you.
Tim Mitteyer.
No comment.
John Vallejo.
My only comment is to notice that the grant funding request we made was denied because we don't actually have a program in place or a plan in place to import water. So that candle continues to burn. We need to move forward on that pretty soon. But other than that, no comment. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And I have no closing comments myself. So with that, we will. This meeting will be adjourned, and our next meeting is going to be May 12th, 2021. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.